Wilkie Branson, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to speak with us today.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be able to have a chance to speak to you and be a part of the festival. So,
How have you been holding up during this quarantine period, during this epic 2020 we're in right now?
it's been a bit mixed. Initially, I was doing quite a lot of work on Tom, so I was quite busy. But then since then, things have been up and down, and I think, like for most people, the main thing is just the uncertainty of what the future is going to bring is a bit difficult. But I've been okay.
Yeah, and we're in a very interesting place, and I know that you're probably in a very interesting place with Tom traveling and being seen at a time when people are very much in a state of isolation and they're very much sheltering at home. What's that been like for you to see the film travel but really still be sheltered at the same time?
It's been it's it's been interesting, I think, because the film its ideal sort of format is really as an installation piece with transparent gauzes, and we should have been touring that this summer. And since the pandemic hit, we've only managed to do one performance like that. But a lot of the themes in the work are to do with isolation and loneliness. So in a way, being able to repurpose it as a film and then have people like yourselves and Sadler's Wells present that, I think has been really interesting, because I hope that the themes are things that people can identify with on a sort of universal level. But I think it is really all at the fore for us at the moment, living in isolation and kind of being held back from our usual sort of societal avenues within life.
So, how did the inspiration for this project come about? Like, how did you? What was the spark that led you to starting this? Very quite long journey into the creation of this project.
Yeah, it has been quite long. I think work started on it in 2016, so it's been about 4 years that it's taken. And I think originally the idea kind of came from wanting to make a piece of work that had a lot of the cinematic kind of tools that you use in film, but then to present that in a 3D space in a theatre. And that's sort of where the concept came. But then, because it is all existing as film, like to make a film version of it was something that we also kind of pursued at the same time. And then that's obviously been sped up the development of that for these times when that's the only way of seeing stuff. But thematically, I think it was just something that I had a desire to make a piece about, and just all the bits of it just kind of like started coming together, and it seemed like the right story to kind of tell.
So you've done work with mixed media before, specifically thinking your film Little Dreams also featured animation as well. Um, what experience do you have with animation and mixed media, and why did you decide to go with down that route with this particular project?
My experience has sort of been a little bit ad hoc. I haven't really trained in film or in animation, and most of the stuff that I've done in using animation has just been because the great thing about it is that anything you can imagine really in your mind, you can make it. And I think that for like Little Dreams, it was just I had an idea and animation was the way of doing it. So I kind of learned how to do that particular type of animation to do it. And I think with this project, it was a similar thing. I wanted to tell a story that went across lots of different landscapes and in different environments where getting licensing to film would have been next to impossible. But then also with animation, you have the benefit of the cameras are all virtual, so you can fly them around and use them as a choreographic tool, and you don't have any of the sort of physical limitations that you would have if you were actually trying to do that in real life. So I think it was just really because it takes a project to a place where imagination is really the only boundary. Anything that you can visualize, you can do if you got enough time to put into it.
Well, I was looking at your behind the scenes video. I think it was produced by Sadler's Wells, that showed just how many different elements went into this. Like you had a green screen studio that, to my knowledge, that you actually built yourself, as well as a bunch of these models. So all the scenes that we see are essentially collections of models that, again, you built yourself. Another stat I saw was that it took something like 200 hours of work per minute of film. Well, first of all, at what point did you realize that this was going to be the amount of work that you were going to devote in the project and invest in the project?
I think that I knew it was going to be long, but I don't think I knew quite how long it was going to take when I started. But I think that I'm probably quite stubborn, so once I got going, I just kept going, and that it is a very multifaceted kind of workflow. So the first phase was making all of the models, and I'd kind of I'd done a proof of concept. So I'd made a small model and then used the photogrammetry to digitize that, and saw that I could then have that as a 3D model in a computer. But what I didn't really realize was that once I'd made all those models, it was going to take so much time to actually digitize all of that stuff with the processing. So things like that, they were constant challenges that I kept coming up against. And I think even things like the final rendering for it, I'm used to doing a lot of compositing and stuff. So going off and making a cup of coffee when something's rendering is normal. But I think when I did the initial calculations for how long it was going to take, it came out at a decade to render the whole film. So when I kind of got to that point, I had to go on the internet and find a different way of doing that stage of the process. So it was kind of constant back and forth and problem solving, really.
Well, something that I really appreciate about the film is that first of all, there's an incredible attention to detail throughout, and such an incredible sense of what technology can do. But there's also a sense of, like, there's the human hand behind this. Like, this isn't like an AI created world or space that we're in. Like, there very much is a human touch to this, right down from the opening shot of the film version, where we essentially deconstruct the entire film by showing that green screen at first. Like, okay, here's the man behind the curtain. Now let's go into the film. So how much sort of like the imperfections of the human hand was intentional? Like how, at what point do you say, okay, this is, I'm not striving for like a perfect technical representation. I'm really striving, like, this is what I'm conceiving of.
Yeah, I think it was constantly sort of treading that line of trying to work out where that sweet spot was. And I think that some of the models, for example, they were, if I'd made them all as 3D models initially, I think that I didn't have the necessary skills to do that in 3D, so they would have looked like a really cheap computer game, I think. But then by making them as physical models, it almost makes something of that human hand, the imperfection of it, and the sort of fallible nature of humans. And so, yeah, I think doing that, it was surprisingly easy to kind of come up with models that looked good enough. I think more difficult was then making them digital, because then as soon as you start going down that road, where you draw those compromises, you start getting back into you lose that organic nature that was in the model initially. So that was a real technical challenge, to kind of walk that path, keep that human element in it, but not make the whole thing take even longer than it did. So
I'm also very interested in the way that you conceive of choreography in this film as well. I think when it comes to screen dance and with dance on film, the notion of choreography shifts when dance goes into the screen. And again, this relates to a lot of your previous work. I think the first film of yours I saw was Big Wide, and I remember seeing those camera movements and being like, oh wow, there's movement right there. And throughout this film, you see movement manifest in many different ways, not just with the movement language that you're performing, but also with the movement of the cameras and even the movement of the scenery itself and, perceived lack of movement as well. How did you choreographically develop these ideas, and knowing that you're working with technology that takes a long time to render, like what kind of feedback loop did you have as far as developing the choreography?
Yeah, that is a big issue, I think, with doing anything that's animated. Is quite often the decisions that you make really early on in the process, you get the flexibility that you get further down the line is a lot less to pick things up, because everything takes so long and it's quite difficult to visualize it. But fortunately, the way that I made it was I could do quite quick renders of stuff just to see the shapes of things and the movement of the camera. And that meant that element of it, the sort of choreography, if you want, of the camera, was something that I could adjust and preview and refine in a relatively quick way. But I think that the thing that's always interested me about film and dance film really is the dancer dancing in the frame, but more the movement of the frame itself. I think that the things that I feel compelled to express as an artist or as a choreographic artist within dance film, it's quite often when I visualize it, instinctively it feels like the movement of the camera is the thing that's doing the majority of the dancing. And I think that probably within Tom, that's reflected in a lot of the stuff that's in it, where the movement of the characters on the screen are often quite pedestrian, but the movement of the camera is a bit more predominant. And I think there's over 200 shots in it, and I think there's only about 4 that don't have any movement in it. So there's a little bit of movement in nearly everything.
Well, I want to shift thematically, but first of all, I know the process of creating the film and sort of that the iterations of generating the images and watching them on screen is time consuming, but it's also the theme of the film and sort of the themes of isolation and mental health add another layer to that. And understandably, to be involved in a process for the better part of 3 years and having to be delving into those themes again and again and again can be grueling in and of itself. So how do you maintain your, not only the stamina and the commitment of creating the work, but also maintaining a sense of healthy creativity throughout such a grueling process?
It's difficult to answer, I think, because it changes so drastically through the process. And I think with any film, you get those moments where you see the results of what you're doing. So if you're rehearsing on site or something and you can see that, then it gives you a momentum. Then you get excited about the next bit. But then maybe when you're sitting in front of all the rushes, you've got like a huge mountain to overcome. And again, it becomes a slog until you start to see them slot together. And I think it was really the same with this, but just in a much more stretched out kind of framework where, I think it was about 10 months it took to make all the models. And at the end of that, it felt like I had them all there and I could see them and I could see the thing that I had in my mind start to materialize. But then it went into another phase where it didn't resurface again for a long time. But I think it's just trying to hold on to those moments where you glimpse the thing that you first visualized and then realize that it can be there and you can have it finalized and see the thing that you wanted to create. But I guess that's the double-edged sword of, especially doing something that's so animation heavy, is one of the things that really spurs you on is that you're creating this thing from nothing almost. It's not like there was even a location which formed the back of the shot. It's all just come from nothing, and that's quite magical. But at the same time, the length that it takes to do that means that you have to really kind of wander around in the dark for quite a long time before you see the fruits of that.
So as far as the film format goes, and as you mentioned earlier, the way that we at the San Francisco Dance Film Festival are presenting it and the way that many have seen it already has been as a film. But the project was originally conceived as an installation. Was there anything surprising about the way that the film in its format right now has been reading, or what it's communicating?
Yeah, in I think so, because with the installation, it's kind of like split into these three layers of depth, and in between each of the transparent gauzes that it's projected onto, you have this negative space, and the image kind of deconstructs and reconstructs, and it's quite an alien thing to look at, and it takes a while to get used to it. And the film is quite, or the content of the work is quite slow, and it's quite meditative in a lot of ways. And in that installation setting, you get a lot of license for people to just sit there and be with it. And I was worried that when we put it as a flat film, that it just wouldn't have enough drive and it wouldn't have enough pace to kind of see it through. And I don't know whether it's because of the time or because of the work itself, but I have been quite surprised that it's translated as well as it seems to have done into that form, where because I suppose a lot of dance films are quite short, and they have that quality of quite an abstract logic to a world, and the kind of stimulus that you get to drive a story in a normal film that might last an hour or longer is usually coded or absent from a dance film. So the fact that people have been willing to really just sit and be with the piece in this form has been a really pleasant surprise, I think, for us.
Do you have any other ideas as to what kind of form this project will take? Like, could it be in another type of installation or another type of media that audiences can watch?
Yeah, we have had a few ideas for some things, and I think one of the things that we would quite like to explore would be to try and present it in some way which makes the most of trying to construct a non-linear narrative out of it. So sort of like fragmenting the whole linear structure of it and then presenting that in a big space, so that you can kind of walk around it in a way. The film is a visual representation of somebody's inner mind, and if you could physicalize that in a space and have people be able to wander in and out of those fragments of memory and construct their own narrative and logic from the story, I think that would be really interesting. But I think we'll just have to wait and see. It's been such a long time that we've been on the project now. I don't know whether we can keep going with it.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Eben, your nephew, who is the other performer that we see in the film. What was it like working with him? And were there any discoveries working with a performer who's so young?
It was really great to work with him. I think it was a really special thing to be able to do with him, for us to get closer together and to share something. But I think that going into it, I'd kind of borrowed slightly from an idea that Anastasia de Keesmaker had about the movement of children, the liberation when they dance, and the skipping and jumping and running, and Eben's he's very cerebral, and I think that he was quite interested in doing things like sweeping up the studio and in the technicalities of what was going on rather than the dancing. But it was something that, I think all of us that were involved, the rest of my family, we've got lots of funny memories of working with him, and I hope that one day he'll watch it and remember something of his part that he played in it.
Oh, nice. I'm glad you got to share that. And lastly, have you been making anything during quarantine?
I haven't been making anything new. I wouldn't say. We have been working towards trying to rework the tour of Tom, the installation one. So we were fortunate to do a performance of that about 3 weeks ago, and trying to just figure out the future of that. So we've been doing that, and I've been lucky to be involved in a project at the National Gallery here in London, which is working on presenting work digitally in the gallery. So that's been really interesting.
And is there anything else that you would like to add, or any message that you would like to share with our audience here?
I think just to reiterate that if you get a chance to watch Tom, just to sit with the piece and take your time with it. I think that it does have a sort of meditative quality to it, and it's one of those films, I think, where you have to work a little bit to get something out of it, but if you get the time to give to it, hopefully you'll be able to see some reflections in the film, and I hope that speaks to some people.